In this lesson, we will be looking at monomials that have negative exponents to them. And so basically you need to know that for negative exponents, you use the reciprocal. So if you have an exponent that is negative and it is in the numerator, it needs to go to the denominator. If it's in the denominator and it's negative, it needs to go to the numerator. If it's positive either place, then it can stay where it's at. Okay? The most common mistake I see when people say x to the negative 5 is they write their answer like this, negative x to the 5th. For some reason, they just take this negative right here and they bring it out in front, and that's not what a negative exponent means. Okay? A negative exponent means that it needs to, the reciprocal needs to be used. So the reciprocal of x to the negative 5th is 1 over x to the positive 5th. Because this is like 1 right here, and notice what I did is I flipped those. Okay? So I used the reciprocal. Or I put it downstairs. That's how I like to say it. Okay? Here, this is 2x to the negative 4th. The most common mistake I see, people realize that the x to the negative 4th needs to go in the basement, but so they'll write this as their answer. Be really, really careful because the 2 is not being raised to a negative power. Only the x is being raised to a negative power. And so, really, if I put I didn't write parentheses here because I don't really need to, but if I were to, that is the only thing that would be raised to the negative power. So because the 2 is not being raised to the negative 4th power, it stays where it's at, and it's just the x to the 4th that needs to go to the basement and become positive. Okay? So it's like that. Here now you can see this one is different. Now that it's in parentheses, now the 2 is being raised to the negative 4th power. So that whole quantity needs to go to the basement and become positive. And then once that happens, I want you to simplify that. Because what this really is, just to write it out the long way, and you don't have to write it out the long way, but 2x to the 4th power is really 2x times 2x times 2x times 2x. So that you can picture that, what you really need to do is you need to take 2 to the 4th power, or 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which is 16. And then x to the 4th power, of course I know I have 1, 2, 3, 4 x's, so x to the 4th power. And this should be your final answer then. So make sure you simplify that if you can. Here I have the 2 being raised to a negative 2 power and the y being raised to a negative 3 power. So they're both negative 3 powers, which means they both need to go downstairs to the basement. And then that is going to be a 1. Okay? So when you're being negative, you get moved to the basement. If you're already in the basement and you're negative, you get kicked out of the basement and you have to go upstairs so you can become positive. Okay? So here, this x has a negative attitude right now, so its mom, it's going to kick it to the basement so that it can turn its attitude around and become positive. So that x is going to go downstairs. The y, though, has a positive attitude. It's good right where it's at. It can stay there. Okay? All right, here the whole entire quantity, negative 2x, is raised to the negative 3rd power. So that quantity is going to get kicked to the basement so it can become positive. Be careful because it is only the exponent that becomes positive. This, when you move it to the basement, the coefficient part of it does not become positive. It is still negative 2x to the positive 3 power. Only the exponent becomes positive. Okay? So that's what that looks like. Of course, this is really 1 over negative 2x times negative 2x times negative 2x. Well, negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, or negative 2 to the 3rd power, would be negative 8, and then x to the, I have 1, 2, 3 x's here, x to the 3rd power. Okay? All right, here I do have an exponent of 0 in there, but be careful because it is only x that is being raised to the 0 power. So only this quantity right here, remember that anything to the 0 power is 1. So I really have 3 times 1 times y to the 4th. Well, 3 times 1 is 3. y to the fourth is what that would look like. Nothing needs to be moved because there's no negative exponents. Again, just a quick review. Absolutely any quantity to the 0 power is 1. So don't forget about that. Here, a little bit of a review from yesterday, or the last lesson. When you're multiplying monomials, remember that you add the exponents. So this really becomes x to the third to 3 plus 5, let's say, which becomes x to the 8th. So I'm going to add those exponents. If you don't remember that rule, I'll uncover it here. When you have the same base, you add the exponents. Okay? Here, we're going to kind of combine these days now. I am multiplying two monomials together first. So when you do that, the bases never change, okay? So my base is going to stay at -2. But I am going to add my exponent, so I'm going to add -3 plus -5. And when I add -3 plus -5, of course I get -2 to the -8th power. Now I do have a negative exponent, okay? Only that exponent, that means that whatever that exponent is on has to be kicked to the basement to become positive. But remember, only the exponent becomes positive. So this -2 has to get kicked to the basement, and that exponent 8 becomes positive. This is a 1 over that. Okay. Now what you're really going to think of is -2 to the 8th power, which really means -2 times 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 -2, 8 times. If you're going to use your calculator for this, I want to caution you that when you're raising negative numbers to an exponent, you have to put them in parentheses. You must put them in parentheses. So on your calculator, you would enter this as parentheses, -2. You're going to look for the little caret key, which is in the upper right-hand side. That's your exponent key, to the 8th power, and then press enter. So -2 to the 8th power is what you're going to enter into your calculator, and you will get 256. All right, here remember that you are going to multiply 3 times -6 to get -18. Add the exponents on your x's, so you will have x to the 4 plus 5, so -18x to the 9th for this one. Here again, multiply the coefficients. 5 times -3 is -15. X to the -1 plus -3. So that becomes -15x to the -4. So my x has a negative exponent on it. My -15 is not raised to the -4th power, so don't touch the -15. Leave the -15 where it's at. But this x to the -4, it's got a negative attitude, and it's got to go to the basement so that it can become positive. Okay, so that's what that one would look like. If you want us to see the rule, here it is. Multiply the numbers like normal, add the exponents. All right, so here I will add the exponents on my x's. So I will have x to the 2 plus 4 and y to the -3 plus 2. So then I have x to the 2 plus 4 is 6, y to the -3 plus 2, which is -1. Of course, this y now has a negative exponent on it. It needs to go to the basement. So this will become x to the 6th. The x is doing just fine. It can stay up there. It's positive, so it's happy. And the y to the -1 has a negative attitude. It's got to go to the basement so it can become positive. And you really don't need that 1 on the y, so you can just simply not write that, but that's how that works. And that should be your final answer. All right, a couple more like that. Here I'm going to multiply. -3 times 4 is -12. Now I know it's a negative number, but it's not a negative exponent. Only when you have a negative exponent does it need to be moved to the basement. So don't touch that -12. It does not have a negative exponent on it. Okay? And then there's this 1 right here. So I have x to the 1 plus negative 3. And then let's go y to the 2 plus negative 1. Okay, so when I simplify that, I will have negative 12 x to the negative 2, y to the 1, and of course you don't really write the 1 there. Okay, only the x has a negative attitude right now and needs to be moved to the opposite spot. So again, you're only going by exponents. So I realize that 12 is negative, but it has a negative coefficient, not a negative exponent. So leave it. Okay, so you will have negative 12 y to the 1, which I'm not going to write the y on, and then that x needs to go downstairs and become positive. And that should do it. Okay, I lied. We're going to do one more. Okay? This one's got a fraction in it, which I know is maybe a little bit tricky. So, I want you to kind of think about this. Okay? This is really x over 1. So when I put this together, I really have negative 3x over 2 to the negative 2 power, just so you can see this. Okay? So what that really means when you have a fraction is you can think about taking it like this. Negative 3x, I'm taking the numerator to the negative 2 power over the denominator to the negative 2 power. Okay? Now, both of those quantities, negative 3x and 2, are raised to the negative 2 power. So because of these negative exponents up here, because of that negative exponent, this quantity needs to go to the basement and become positive. Because of this negative exponent, the 2 that's in the denominator is being negative in the basement. It's got to go back upstairs so it can become positive. Okay? So what that will look like is this. I have the 2 that gets moved to the upstairs so that it can become positive, and I have the negative 3x that needs to get moved to the basement so that it can become positive, and this is what it looks like here. Notice that this negative right here did not get changed when it got moved to the basement. Only the exponent becomes positive. Okay? So then in the numerator, I have 2 squared, which is 4. In the denominator, I have negative 3 squared, which is really negative 3 times negative 3, which of course that's 9. And then x squared, which of course is just x squared. So that's what that one should look like. All right, now we will be done.